So, welcome to the podcast, Jon Davison.
Thanks, Martin.
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, ready to talk
Appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to chatting more clowning. So I've asked Jon on today as a follow-up. Our first episode on clowning was so popular that people are really engaging with this topic, and hopefully you're going to bring a different stance and a different experience and a different narrative to the whole conversation. So could we start? I suggest we just start with who you are, Jon, and what your sort of journey into clowning was, and where you are now in that.
Okay, yeah. So I'm first. Well, I was first and foremost a performer. I still regard myself as that's my main thing, even though I haven't done much of it recently. Secondly, a teacher of clowning, had some related bits and pieces. And thirdly, I guess a director of clowns. And fourthly, a writer about clowns and how to do it, and also the history and the ideas we've had about clowns. And so that's in the latter stage. In the last 15 years or so, I've published 3 books about clowns and clowning. I started when I was a student of languages and got into acting by accident. And that's a long story, which you don't need to hear. I thought, oh yeah, this feels like home. And then some years later, I got given a clown role in a Victorian melodrama where you have a mixture of extremely serious characters going about extremely dastardly things and 1 or 2 idiots who kind of weave in and out. It's kind of a very common setup for popular theatre all over the world, actually. And I thought, oh, this is even more fun than acting. I get to climb into the audience and look them in the eye and accuse them of stealing things from me, stuff like that. And so then I decided to go and study clowning. I never wanted to study acting. Didn't know why, but later on when I taught in drama schools, I kind of understood why it wouldn't have been for me. But studying clowning was a thing, yeah. So I went to circus school in Bristol and found what teachers I could here and there around in London and around UK. And then I felt, yeah, I'm now a clown. And started working exclusively on creating and performing shows which could be called clown. Mostly in theatre, that's where I started. That's where I felt like most at home. And later street and some circus as well. And then much later on, I went back into academia and did my master's and my PhD on clowning, and that's where I am today.
I mean, there are so many sort of, I say juxtapositions there in a way, but it's an interesting journey you've gone into that there, because firstly, you can go to a place to study clowning. You can go to clown school. And I bet many people have this sort of image of clowns as these sort of street performers and those sort of people that you may see outside Covent Garden performing in the streets. And the other side of that is you can go and do a PhD in clowning or related to clowning. So those 2 things are actually quite far apart, aren't they, in some respects?
Yeah, in the popular imagination they are, and in a way that's kind of that's kind of always going to be there. Anyone being serious about comedy, for example, is inevitably in a paradox. They are big, paradox of thinking about comedy. But on the other hand, many, I can't say most, but I would guess most professional performers who have at some point their aim is to make people laugh. So broadly in the comedy, beyond clowning, think about how they do it.
It's interesting because we spoke briefly prior to the recording that you talked about this idea that you stumbled upon clowning, because it's probably not something that anybody immediately has an idea that they're going to get involved with. I say it's almost like a secret club, but it's certainly something that you sort of fall into and discover, isn't it? Rather than maybe go out to find.
Sure. I know people who, for example, say, when I was 6, saw a clown and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. Or I went to a kids sort of circus workshop and we did a bit of clowning. We had a red nose and I felt, oh, that's what I want to do. And then later on, they find a way to get there so I think, just the same as other vocations, some people have that idea early and some don't. I didn't. Like I said, when I was like 20 years old before I thought, oh, acting, that's fun. So yeah, and then some people come later in life, come to workshops, for example, middle-aged, elderly, I feel there's something in clowning that could help me, and I really want to explore it.
And I guess as well, actually, you said about people seeing a clown, maybe you see a clown in a circus or you see, and you think, oh, I want to do that. But for a lot of people seeing that, it probably isn't something that locks in their mind and goes, actually, that could be a job, that could be a living. And you must be in the minority of people who've managed to take this to the roots where you can now monetize this and make it a thing that you can call a living or call a job.
Yeah, actually, that's funny because when I was making that switch was, okay, I'll leave acting behind. I'll go for clowning. One of the thoughts I had was that I think I could make more money doing clowning than normal acting. For me, in my head at the time, acting was about the things I'd done were kind of quite serious, contemporary 20th century theatre like Beckett and stuff like that. They were not everybody's cup of tea. But when the clown thought, oh, this is, I can get everybody interested in this. And that was the appeal. And so I thought, okay, so there's more work here because it's for everybody, or nearly everybody. There's a way to get nearly anyone to laugh.
Which is an amusing thing to recognise, really, because a lot of people who would go into acting and theatre would probably acknowledge that is not a way to make money. And so you've always got, you would think clowning would be the lesser way to make money of the two, but actually, as it turns out,
well, I mean, I've monetized it. That is the word, because that's what we have to do in our society anyway. Yeah, I've monetized it partly by teaching, partly by directing, partly by publishing, getting research funding. I did my PhD. I wanted to do it. I was enthused by research, but it was also because I got a scholarship, and I got some, support for it financially. So it helped me through a few years when I didn't have much work.
But it does it does lead us into that thread that I know we've had a prior conversation about, the fact that you'd also been interested in listening to the previous podcast, but also your ideas of that actually there's something here for teachers to take from clowning. It is a podcast about teaching and learning on the whole, and you'd had teachers in a workshop and recognised that maybe this could be something that could be a genuine contribution to that as a profession, because you'd raised the issue of clowning as a practice, that there was a theory behind clowning, but maybe the theory wasn't always right. And thinking about that since our conversation, it is a physical art form, isn't it? It is something that is physical, so it would be sensible to look at it from a practical point of view.
Yeah, it's something that happens, in a space in time usually between human bodies. That you can have it, in a two-dimensional art form, in a visual form, or you can have it in puppet form, or you can have it in recorded, cinema or TV, digital media. But yeah, it is quite linked to an interaction between some people who we call clowns for the moment, and some people who we call onlookers or audiences. It depends on the context, or customers. Monetize it, or if we're going to education, we're talking about teachers and students, of course. But I say let's call that the clown because it's slippery. The who's doing the clowning. It's more a system between people. Some people take certain roles and it can shift around. But yeah, it's something essentially that happens it seems to happen only in the moment you're doing it. But there's lots of preparation and lots of planning and lots of thinking ahead and lots of, I know what I'm doing and I'm predicting this is going to happen. But the sense that we have of it is very much, this is happening now between us.
Which is very much like teaching, because obviously you have to go in there with an idea in your head of where it's going to go, have a plan. It's an interaction between myself and the pupils. And obviously you hear about the class clown, but actually I'm interested in what clowning can teach us as educators in terms of our, for want of a better word, performance, at the front there. What can we take from that? So we spoke off air a little bit about reactions, didn't we?
Yeah.
In that context.
So, yeah. And that, just to go back a little bit, you mentioned the thing of clowning as a practice, as action. So for me, I kind of got very interested in that because my clown education, who I learned from, was great and interesting, but it was also sometimes problematic. Like, why are the teachers talking about this or that seemed to me very abstract ideas about clowns and this, and they talk about the clown. I think, what is that? What is that? How does that help me do it? And my style is probably to do things and to teach by asking people, inviting people to do things. And I learned from watching other people do things, I think. And that's just the way it is for me. So I started developing a way of teaching that suited me. That was me asking, how do we do this? How do we clown? How can we reliably do it? So, and it still is very much like that. So, for example, come in the door. There's a door behind me. Someone comes in there, come up behind me, tap me on the shoulder, disappear. For example, there you go. There's a little clown routine, little trick. But it's all about the doing, and then it's not there's not an abstract. You're not working from an idea of what clowning is. You're working from what they do, because we have lots of ideas about clowns, and some of them don't quite fit how we do it. And so for me, it's always better to work from the doing. What can we do, and what actually has an effect, than the ideas we have. I guess that's the same for any field. In education, the ideas about what education is for, or what's the concept, but actually when you're doing it, it might not be quite like that.
I guess it's similar to in classroom practice, a couple of subjects, maybe art or science. You get taught abstract theory, don't you, in physics or chemistry, but putting that into practice is how you're going to learn it. And I guess studying artists and the ideas behind why a certain artist paints in a certain way is very different to picking up a paintbrush and having a go yourself and developing your own style. And so is that kind of what you're thinking? That sort of similar?
Yeah.
It's okay to have the theory, but eventually you've got to step in and give this a go.
Yeah, I think you're painting, actually thinking of a friend of mine who's a visual artist and worked in oils, and I finally understood something about painting, or I thought I did. I said, well, look at this painting here. There's light. It's as if light is coming out of it. Light is coming off the canvas, and then that's what he looks at. Oh yeah, and then I could start spotting that elsewhere. Not to say that's the only criteria for judging, a painting, but and then the thing is, well, how do you do that? Oh well, there's this technique, and then you use this, and then you get into can you actually do that? But if you start from just the idea, art should inspire, for example, well, how are we going to do that? So how am I going to? Well, art should be original. And then the same with clowns. The clowns must, somehow take us to our fundamental truth or something. Well, how on earth am I going to do that? I can walk in the door, I go out again, and I do it. Hopefully, find a way to do it that will be ridiculous and provoke laughter at what's going on. And then we could talk about what it means, maybe. But the practice for me is what's exciting.
But presumably, though, you still have to have gone through the process of studying clown theory to get to that point and be able to put it into practice. Can you come straight in at the practice? Is it much like, I watch my daughter with her crafts and her arts, and there's no kind of theory or concept there. She just leaps in with materials and just starts making. I mean, yesterday, literally, she made a giant toothbrush out of cardboard that's taller than she is, for no reason whatsoever, because she saw the materials and went, I'm going to make a toothbrush. We don't know where that came from, and she spent hours down there modelling it. Is it that idea that you can just leap into something?
Yeah. I mean, you need to know what a toothbrush looks like first. You need that idea. That's the theory, and you need to know how big they are usually, and you need to know that's a massive one. So that's a good clown prop. So that's a clown theory. Yeah, things are funny when they're too big.
Yeah,
for example, not always, but also if we know what they are and whether so we predict something, it's going to be like, oh, here's a toothbrush. Oh, it's massive. And then we get a toothbrush, but it's oversized. So it's based on, there's your theory of clowning, but it's a theory of clowning about the action and how it works. And once you get more expert at doing it. So you talked about Covent Garden street performers, many of whom would have studied and many of whom wouldn't. But either way, they're working out, if I do this, then wait a bit, then do that, then show the audience this, then say that. That usually works in 90% cases. And when it doesn't, then I have this. So it's, thinking teaching is like, oh, okay, so I'm going to ask them the question at the beginning of the class and then say, oh, at the end, so you set up this process where you will reach a certain point. And in clowning or street performing, that particular type, you'll reach this kind of climax where people go, yes, here's the money. And in teaching, you reach the point, hopefully, where, your students will go, yeah, that was a great class. I understood this and this and this, and I didn't realize that was the case. But it's all sort of structured, but it's all happening now. That's tricky.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, how we talked about the idea of having to learn the theory of being a clown there, but a young child can just leap into that process and recognise straight away a giant toothbrush is just funny if you pull it out. It's that natural, it's that almost like, I don't have to learn funny, this is just funny.
No, you don't need to learn what clowns are. That's all part of how we understand things, whether we call it clowns or whatever it is, doesn't matter. And I think that was behind my feeling years ago that, okay, this is for everyone. Everyone understands that. They may not all laugh, or they may not want to laugh, or they may not enjoy it, or whatever, fine. But everyone will pretty much get it, whereas not everyone will get that Samuel Beckett's, Wait If You've Got to is important because, well, at least I felt that. Yeah,
I mean, it just as a little sort of side note, it is that, that idea is lovely when somebody doesn't want to laugh and can't help it. And then that is a genuine laugh, and you've caught them off guard with something, and they're thinking they don't want to find it funny, but they find it funny. Yeah. There's just something about human humour, isn't there? What we find funny and what we don't find funny is a real area of study, I suppose.
It is, and I remember once with the show we had that involved at one point me asking members of the audience if they would kindly share their laughter with us, so we know what it sounds like. It's kind of a joke. And there was a friend in the audience one evening, and I asked her, could we hear your laugh, please? And no, I kind of insisted and thought, and one of the things is like this, almost this little battle to, okay, this person is resisting. How can I get around them? How can I surprise them? How can I, it's a little battle. It's fun. And no, I'm not going to. And afterwards I said, what are you doing? Why are you ruining my bit? And I said, I thought that's what you're supposed to do with clowns, isn't it? It's like, no, make me laugh. Come on then. And she was right. I thought, yes, that's part of this game. And I do enjoy that aspect of it. So if there's someone that's, I don't know, not interested, bored, cynical, whatever it is, then, okay, let's see if I can bring that person into the game.
It's interesting, people's laughter, isn't it? Because I have very distinct memories of being at school, and I can remember at least one teacher's very specific laugh, and a girl who used to be in my French class, and if she lost control in French and started laughing, then she couldn't stop. That ridiculous, like, I can't stop it, it's out of control kind of laughter. But I recognise as I'm getting older, I'm a bit of an internal laugher. Sometimes I can watch something really funny and not laugh out loud, but I'm finding it funny and I'm sort of laughing on the inside. And I feel like, I should be laughing out loud at this, but because I'm finding it funny, but why am I not laughing? I don't know. I don't know what that is, what that mechanism in my brain that, whether it's something that doesn't want to make the noise or I don't know.
I mean, laughter is, such a big out there signal that is slightly uncontrolled, slightly involuntary, slightly, so it's out of our control, or it feels like it is. So as a signal socially, we learn how to rein it in, how to control it. Different people have different strategies, but I think pretty much like any expression of emotional feeling or response, we learn how to adapt, how to control it. So for whatever reason, might be better just to hold that in. I'm thinking school and being played opera in school assembly, and we all laugh, and then you learn you're not supposed to.
But it's that, for me, it's that, I could go and watch a comedian and be nervous about sitting too close to the front where I could be seen because they would think he's not laughing, and that would mean these be picked up. But I know I'm finding you funny. I just, it's funny, the things that trigger sometimes are those tiny little puerile, immature jokes that suddenly, and you're off, aren't you? And you just can't stop laughing at those things. And it's just interesting what triggers that little humour switch, that funny bone in you. And not the same.
It's really hard to. Yeah. Actually, when it happens, it's kind of not worth worrying about why it happened. And Yeah. I'm the same. When I was younger, I used to sit at the front of everything, hoping I would be used as a volunteer. And then nowadays, I sit right out of sight because I do find it, for comedy stuff, and I do prefer comedy or clowning where I feel like it's okay if I don't laugh. And there's lots of comedy and clowning that it feels like it's not okay when you don't laugh. So there's sort of pressure. And I think for me, one thing about clowning I like is that being able to go with, oh, okay, it's not funny. And okay. So, and actually having tools as a performer to be okay with that rather than kind of pushing the audience. So actually to let them have a reaction. And I think that to and fro between performer and audience or teacher and students or, speaker and listeners or whatever in a group is really, really important. And if you have that, if you let yourself go, okay, it's fine. Right. Or in a teaching, go, John, what's the answer to that? You know what? I don't know. Should we look it up? So to have that, I don't know, or that didn't work, I think it's so important. And in clowning, you can do that. It's not a problem because clowns are supposed to be failures. So when they're not funny, it's also fine.
And I sort of maybe I've got this scattered about my notes somewhere. This idea that ties in very well with teachers. The idea of we should be allowed to fail, pupils should be allowed to fail, everyone should be able to have a go at things, and it's okay. It creates what we need to be creating is an environment within, I guess, the ethos of clowning, to some extent, where that's allowed to happen, and we move on from that. We try something different. We try something new. And is that to do with that's when we talk a bit about actions there, I guess, but also a little bit about reactions? Are we looking? A clown is looking for reaction, in the same way that teacher is looking for reaction.
Yes,
but it's not about my need as a teacher to get that reaction. I guess it's about it should be about the pupils. Is it the same for clowning? Is it about the audience?
Yes,
I worded that well.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like I worded that very well. I knew what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. I would say to people doing clowning and learning it, it's you're there to serve the audience, basically. You're a servant of the audience, and if they don't enjoy it, then it's almost like your internal monologue might be, "Oh, sorry, you didn't like that. Really sorry." Okay,
and I guess it's the same for you.
You keep coming back.
Yeah. I'm just thinking in terms of teaching. That's me trying to let go of the fact that I need to get something out of this. That I am here to help you guys. This isn't about me.
Yeah,
it's about you.
No, but it is also quite gratifying when you kind of get comfortable as a teacher or a performer.
Yeah.
With that, okay, not that, then okay, what? I'll suggest something else. Or do you know what you want? No, you don't know what you want. Okay, let's look something up. Or, I think of that because I do that in my non-clown teaching, when I'm teaching like history of ideas and performance or stuff like that, theoretical stuff. It's usually that, I have this little joke. We have this code for, to see who's present in the class, and they have to go enter the code, and it's a 4-digit code every class. So it often looks like a year. So it's like, I don't know, 1826. So I say, oh, what happened in the world of performance in 1826? And they'll go, was it Shakespeare? I don't think so. Was it? And then they'll say, John, so what? Tell us what happened. I don't know. Why would I have that in my head? Let's look it up. Let's find out. Let's ask someone who thinks they know. Let's read a book. Let's Google it. And, so it becomes a joint operation between teacher and students or clown and audience. We're going, okay, we all want to enjoy this. That wasn't funny. I'm talking performance now. How about this? What about this? Right. Okay. So this is what you like. Okay, let's do that.
What I take from that, though, is that idea that as we go into education, we go into teaching, whether it's to be a teacher in a school like myself or to teach clowning, because we want people to get better at something. And in teaching, I guess what you described there is what I would say I would want to be like as a teacher. Let's find things out together. But of course, there is a curriculum that you have to teach, and it's finding that balance between those two. But if clowning can teach us that sometimes we should be, let's teach you the excitement of finding out something random and new, or the process we can go about to find that out, as opposed to, I've got the information, you need it, I'm going to give it to you. Even if you can make that an interesting and amusing process, an engaging process, what we should be teaching is the skill of, let's do this together. So you're kind of walking alongside the pupil as opposed to dictating information at them. Yeah, really important, I think.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I
mean, what sort of, if we're staying on that idea of what can teachers get from the practice of clowning? Are there any sort of, I don't want to call them tips, sort of techniques that would cross over between the two, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, what you mentioned before about, getting things wrong. There's something in clowning I think is really interesting. And this was part of my education in clowning was an approach which is very common nowadays, which is basically setting students up to fail. So you'll set up an exercise or give an instruction which is kind of difficult or even impossible or even doesn't make any sense at all. And you'll say, right, okay, come on, do this. And different teachers have different manners about doing it, but basically the approach is to induce a failure, a flop. And as I say, there'll be different styles, and some of it will be harsh and some of it will be gentle. But it's basically that this is the way you get to clowning, by experiencing this failure. I think it's interesting up to a point, especially when you're beginning and you kind of get used to it. It's okay just to go, I don't know. Yeah. And you really can't do it. But as time goes on, I found personally it got really wearisome, and especially to create clowning it's just like constantly trying to trip yourself up, and it's just, yeah. So I kind of ended up veering more towards the other side. Rather than being induced to fail, can you choose to fail? Or any other word that's like that: make a mistake, do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, do it at the wrong time, have the wrong size toothbrush. So you can choose these things. And personally, I find that much more liberating. I mean, the other method works for some people, and it works particularly for people that probably outside of that situation are not feeling particularly vulnerable to being failures or mistakes or misfits or somehow wrong identity or the wrong color or the wrong gender or all that kind of thing. So it worked for someone like me, because I don't generally feel vulnerable out there in the street here in London. But for lots of people, it doesn't. It's inducing a vulnerability in people who already live it. So the choose clown, can be really liberating. And it gives you loads more tools, and it puts power in your hands. So you can choose to do something wrong. So I'm saying all that because then in the classroom, we can choose to get the wrong answer. We can choose even what happens when you just for fun, you deliberately give the wrong answer, or just for fun, you respond in the wrong way or the wrong manner or the wrong tone or at the wrong time, or you face the wrong direction, or, so those are all very clown things. But I think if you kind of take the extreme clowning out of it, you could still, in any other educational situation with a different subject matter, you can say, look, let's see how many mistakes we make. Let's count them. And you give them a value. Sort of, can you validate it so it becomes something people could choose to do for fun? And then it's not so scary, because then when you do make a mistake, or you do give a bad answer, or you do something in a way that is kind of sanctionable, it's like, okay, of course it's going to happen.
Way that the education system works, of course, is that at the end of however many years you're in education, whether you're doing a university, whatever, at some point there's a formative assessment which you will pass or fail, and the judgment is on pass being good, isn't it, and fail being bad, essentially.
Yeah.
So to rethink that in the process on the journey is a good thing. Of course, at the end of it, we want people to pass and do well or succeed in whatever form that takes. But on the journey, learning that it's okay to fail, which goes right back to episode 1 when I first recorded with Tim back at episode 1, was all about failure, the importance of that. But certainly for me as a teacher, it's taken a long time to accept it can go wrong. And it can be funny. My science lessons are notoriously bad in that the lessons are well structured and great and the experiment's right, but they work about 50% of the time. But the other 50% of the time when they go wrong are the ones the kids love and remember. They're the
experiments.
Ones. Yes.
Right, because that reminds me, I think I mentioned to you previously, a friend of mine who's a biochemist, lecturer in biochemistry, and we used to talk a lot about experiments. She would say, she'd ask new students, what's a successful experiment? And they'd say, it's where you set this up and you have this hypothesis, this will happen when I do this and this and this, and it happens exactly as you predicted. Yeah. And then you say, well, what's a failed experiment? Well, where you do that and something else happens that you didn't expect. And what do you learn from each of those? And the first one, well, you learn you were right. And the second one, you learn something new and something you don't know. There must be something else I don't know yet. And then they'd go, oh, right, yeah, that's science, right? Yeah, where you have unexpected outcomes that you then have new theories about and new ideas. And that's just fun. I mean, who wants to just predict everything to be right? And it is. Well, some of us do like it. It's true.
But that would mean you can't have success without failure, can you?
No. And so I think, can you take the heat out of failure by whatever means? Maybe just use an example as a teacher going like, I forgot my pen again today, or, are you the class clown? Is it literally that performing that idiot who, what subject is this? It might be that. That might be your style, or it might not be. Or it might be more formal kind of way of reassuring students that, it's inevitable failure. It makes me think, I had an online test recently for something that I'm training for, something not clowning or education. And they said, you can do this test. You can do it as many times as you want until you get it right. Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah, why not? You can fail 1,000 times and then get it right.
But equally, that's a very good way of learning, isn't it? Because what you're doing is, last time I got this bit wrong, I'm going to tweak that, I'm going to change this, I'm going to do that. And of course, I told you that, just going back a minute or two, I did tell you that story about the time that I lost my trumpet inside my classroom when I was using it to demonstrate something in science. And it was between my legs on the floor on a stand. Everybody could see it. The teaching assistant could see it. The kids could see it. And they all thought I was doing a skit. I've told them they thought I was doing a skit, and I wasn't. I had genuinely lost my trumpet in the class. But all I had to do was look down. I would have seen it. But I thought of another one afterwards, when in an Ofsted inspection, I ended up banging a bottle of water against the desk because I'd doing an experiment around Disney's Frozen and Elsa, the power of Elsa, and I was going to turn this bottle of water, and the kids were going to watch it freeze before their very eyes, and I'd got the deionized water and I put it in the freezer for the allocated amount of time, and all you're supposed to do is bang it on the table and magic happens. The Ofsted inspector would come in with the deputy head and, what's going on? I'd kind of explained, and I'd pick the bottle up and, you just watch this, and nothing happens. Just all the Ofsted inspector saw me was just banging a bottle of water against the table in frustration, and nothing happened. But that lesson is I mean, that was I bet that was 6 years ago, that Ofsted inspection, and it still comes up with the kids. So remember that time? Right. They'll tell their parents that time he just, it didn't work. Yeah.
Memorable things. Yeah. And I think there are other things also that, if you go through clown education, training, whatever, workshops, or teach or learn, whether you're a performer or not, that will probably help. I don't have any clear ways of translating that into another educational field, but I'm sure if you were in that field, you would be able to do it. So there's things in clowning, like, for example, because clowns are like these representations of the things we're not supposed to be. The failure, the mistake, the wrong time, the wrong place, the behavior is wrong, the look is wrong, everything is, no, you shouldn't be like that. And that's kind of what they are. Then in clown training, you're getting people to feel comfortable with the way that they do things wrong. That can go just as well on an emotional level or a sensitive level or feeling level as in actual action. So, for example, if you're, I don't know, so when you get angry, you don't want to get angry because whatever, you don't like getting angry, so you kind of try to mask it. But maybe when you get angry, you're really funny. I had this when I was studying. People laughed at me when I got angry when I was performing. So, okay, so can you play the anger? So it's something you would normally mask. And it's often that is the opposite of what you would do in day-to-day life. So you start to value what you judge as negative. Yeah. So on an emotional level, that's quite impactful sometimes. So, and also in the way that you learn as well, and the way you do things. I might have a student, like, we had a 3-week course recently, and at the end of, like, on last but one day, someone came up with something completely out of the blue. I thought, where did that come from? That's not what we've been learning. But it was perfectly good, and their style of performing. So you don't, there's no point then saying, oh, well, you didn't do it how I told you to do it. It's like, oh, I don't know how you got there. And in this case, they said to me, oh, it's because of the classes. I felt that I was free enough to do this. I know it's not what you were looking for, I think, but this is what's ended up like for me. So you get to accept all these different ways of doing things, different styles that could easily be judged by a teacher as being wrong. Like, no, we're not doing it like that. You don't have enough focus, or maybe someone is really distracted, and that's the way they clown, for example. So it does help the whole group, teacher included, come to an understanding that we have many ways of doing things, learning things, understanding things, getting things right and wrong, and they're all useful. So I think that if you put that back in another classroom could be quite useful.
But I think that's something that's been thrown around in teaching since I started teaching in 2000. And it's about time we actually started putting that more into practice, that idea, as opposed to it being a theory, which is what you're kind of talking about right at the start, that every kid is different ways of learning, there's different ways of approaching this. And yet quite often in schools, we don't facilitate that really well because it's challenging. And I know I jotted down here about you mentioning that in that context, one of the purposes of clowning was that it was quite, or clowning theory is that it's quite liberating to give people the freedom to step outside the box, which is what you've just described with that person there, haven't you? You know, I now have these skills and I'm confident enough to do it differently, to recognize we are all different.
Yeah. And they used the skills for something that I completely didn't predict. And the first time I saw it, I was, what? And I was judging it negatively, but then they're like, no, this is this person's way. This is great. There's an advantage in clowning in that clowning is set up to be, it's expected that you will be different, wrong, on the margins. It's a safe place because that's what we're looking for. Yeah, ultimately it's like, please disobey. Yeah, please don't do what I tell you. To point. So it's this place where you're supposed to be wrong, whereas other settings you're supposed to be right. So I think it's maybe more challenging than in a strictly clowning setting, but still, yeah. I don't know how I would teach people it's okay to get the wrong answer if I wasn't strictly in the clowning field. But I'm sure it's that's for someone else to do. It's not my area.
But the idea of it certainly is realistic. And I think this kind of resonates and permeates my mind a little bit with a couple of things I've been reading recently. You know, there's been a lot of talk in the newspapers and the media and magazines about the value of play and the lack of play, and a screen-based childhood over a play-based childhood. And of course, a play-based childhood kind of, in a lot of respects, allows children to be those clowns. It's that sort of play is acceptable. You can try things, you can get them wrong, you can climb a tree, fall out of a tree, you can make something random out of a box that doesn't work, or you play around with it, becomes something that does. And I wonder whether this skill set is something we need to be definitely reintroducing. And I wrote down the phrase, I think you mentioned it, permitted disobedience as well.
Yeah.
You know, deliberately allowing people to get out, do it differently to see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But are we, and it goes back to, are we allowing children the freedom to do that? Maybe we're not. And could that be where clowning could tie in with play? And I think there's something in that.
Play's a tricky one, I think. This is a concept. I'm not sure we know what we're talking about generally, because it covers so many things. So, for example, in clown training, when I'm teaching people clowning, sometimes they'll use a children's game to start the session. Yeah. And then it will have rules, and they'll probably have played it before. They might have different versions of it if they're from different parts of the world at different ages. And so there'll be a thing about rules, and then very quickly there'll be this thing where someone will say, "Can we do this? Are we allowed to do that?" And my stock answer now is, if I haven't told you you can't, then yes, you can. And then suddenly it becomes not playing with a set of rules, but seeing what infinite number of possibilities might be possible. Strange phrase. Might that you could do without strictly breaking any of the rules, which are very few. Because actually, when we play games, even, so I'm not sure of the age, but remembering like 6 and 7-year-olds, they're very rule-bound games. You can't do that. No, you can't. No, unless you're there, you can't do that. And they know all the extra rules that are not written down. Then we carry that through into adulthood. But that's quite a restrictive thing. It's a kind of fantasy set of version of society where there's all these things you can and can't do and when you can do it. But in clowning, if it's going to be any use, you've got to break out of that a bit. And so I'm not sure if that's play or if it's, some people say, oh, you just spoiled the game.
Well, it's a bit different to the concept of like free play. If you released a dozen kids into a woodland, what would they do, and what would they do with the sticks and stones and the trees? It's a very different idea.
It is.
But what you're talking about there is the idea, I guess, that if there can be rules, the rules are there for a reason. But we can waive them, and we can push them, and we can tweak them into a different shape, and it's still the same game.
Yeah.
But it's morphing, it's evolving, it's becomes a creative process.
Yeah, I always instinctively go for how can I cheat? What looks like cheating? How can I, how can I do something that's against the spirit, like the spirit of the game? I'm talking about games because games in that way have been used quite a lot in theatre and clowning over the last few decades. And they've tended to, in a strange way, restrict things a bit. So I absolutely agree. If you can access something that is freer, absolutely. But beware that there's always this pull back to, when you're doing that thing that you're freely choosing, you can't do that. So there's a lot of, for whatever reason, I don't really know. I haven't thought about that too much. As human beings, we do like to go, but no, not that way. Can't do that.
Yeah, I've already had kids in my classes over the years who always find a way of doing it their own way. They sort of do the lesson activity you want them to do, but they come up with something a little bit different. And I think for teachers, having the confidence to recognise that pupils should be allowed to step outside the box a bit. They shouldn't be allowed to do what they want, but they should be allowed to come at you in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, because for some people, just to do it the way you're expected to do it is kind of a bit disempowering, or they've experienced it that way for whatever reason. So if they just do it slightly differently, then it's theirs, and I think that's important. It can also come across very negatively. I'm not going to do what you say, but now I will because I've decided. But these are just attempts to sort of own the thing, I think, and that's important.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with
exactly?
That?
What's wrong?
That's a great.
Why would you want a learner to own what they're experiencing?
If you think, it's been a long time since I've taught in mainstream, but if you imagine all of the homeworks we had as young men, boys sent home, they were all pretty much the same in one way or another. There was a pen and paper and writing and all the rest of it. But what would be wrong with saying, okay, I want you to present to me some information. Let's say the topic is clowning. I want you to come back at me how you like. You can do it through the form of an art piece, a poem, a song. You can answer these questions, or and just see who picks what, because it could tell you an awful lot about the student.
Oh yeah, Oh yeah, absolutely.
Almost like a diagnostic tool of learning styles are part of that. Yeah. So I guess it does go back to that question of what is a clown? How do we define what a clown is? Because that is quite tricky. Because I know my ideas of a clown when I first started approaching this idea of clowning were very much based on what I'd seen in Disney, what I'd seen down the circus, and people I'd seen performing in the streets. And fast realised it is actually way more complicated now. But where would you sit with that then? A definition?
Right. Well, I would say all your answers that you to what is a clown are all right. They're all correct. So yeah, it's a strange phenomenon that, again, wanting to demonstrate that people have the wrong idea about things. And I think most people, I would say mostly, we know what clowns are at a basic level. And that might be a particular instance of it, particular visual aspect, or, and it doesn't really matter. But I think we wouldn't be able to engage with clowning if we didn't really know what it is. Like you said, your daughter doing the toothbrush thing, although, it might not say it's a clown toothbrush. There's an understanding of how that works, right? So somehow in our education or our nature or whatever it is, we've understood that some things like this are what we call clowns. Yeah. And so I think we know this already. So I'm not too worried about defining clowns because I think everyone already knows. And that's why I thought I would make a better living being a clown than being an actor. Having said that, I think there are some interesting definitions of clowns, but it depends what you want your definition for. So whenever anyone asks me to define clowns, I said, well, right now for what we're doing, I'd say this: on another day in another place for another function, might be more useful to think of it like that. There are hundreds, infinite number of definitions. But for what we're talking about now, I think a useful definition is that you could view clowns performing together as being a kind of manifestation or a staging, so putting on stage their performance of what we think is clever, stupid, what we think knowledge is and ignorance is, right and wrong, also morally. So it's all about what we think how things should be. So they should be morally right. They should be clever. They should be with knowledge. Should be based on facts, and all the things we think are wrong. So shouldn't be morally wrong. Shouldn't be stupid. So it's not understanding the world, and it shouldn't be based on ignorance because you don't know what there is there. And so we have these ideas about ignorance and knowledge. I think that's a useful, and clowns play with that. And might get a duo of clowns. You get one that seems to be very clever and thinks they know everything, and one that appears to know nothing. And you think, oh, the outcome of this is that the one who knows everything is going to prove they know everything, and the one who's looks stupid is going to end up being an idiot and prove to be an idiot. It switches. It switches back, and this whole thing is in play. Like, hang on, who's stupid here? Who's clever here? So the kind of the story, the drama, the scenarios of clowning are we could say are about, knowledge, ignorance, all this stuff. So for education, that's interesting because we're talking about learning stuff. We're talking about knowing things. We're talking about not knowing things. What is it for? So that would be my definition, if that made any sense. It wasn't very well articulated, I must say. But clowns stage our concepts of knowledge. Clowns are a staging of our ideas of what knowledge and ignorance is.
So would that include, this is where I find it challenging personally, I've gone to the circus and I've watched a clowning performance, quite a slapstick performance like I would have seen back in the day. Big shoes, big pants, red nose, custard pies. Where would that fit in with that?
Well, it depends how many clowns you're talking about. Let's be specific. One,
let's say 6.
2.
Oh, I've gone
six
6
clowns. And
is that okay to go 6?
Got big shoes on. Okay, they all got big shoes.
No, let's say half of them have got big shoes on.
Right, what the other half got on their feet?
Normal size shoes. One has got.
Okay.
Go on. I was going to put one on stilts.
No, okay, so let's say one on stilts. Okay, so when we see this, there will be assumptions, cultural assumptions about who is agile physically. So the person on stilts is obviously, we're going to assume, is more physically able and balanced, has a greater knowledge of their body in space. And the ones with the big shoes are clumsy and they're going to trip over, and they're like, their bodies are slightly wrong, and they haven't, they're like a little bit like animals. So they've got feet that don't let them walk in a normal way. And we're getting into dodgy territory here already about judging what bodies are right and what are wrong. This is all conventions from a way back. So let's go with it. And the people wearing normal size shoes, well, they must understand how society works, and they are normal people, and they do things by the rules, and they know what to do and what to say and when. So we're going to assume who's the clever one, who's the stupid one, who is the, morally upstanding citizen, and who is the one who might be a little bit, might do something a bit risky. I'm not sure I want to get near them. Or I might feel, oh, I like them because I'm quite clumsy. I'm going to gravitate towards that one. So just from costume, you've staged that thing. It's a repetition of stuff that we know. It's a type. It's been repeated over decades and centuries. And in a different culture, you have different things. This color wig would mean that kind of costume would mean this. So yeah. So already you've got a staging of shoes.
And do you think some of that, because I guess when you come to see a clown or you see a clown, some people are going to see that in quite a superficial way. They're just going to see maybe the slapstick humour side of it. But other people, is it an unconscious interpretation of a clown? Do you think when you go in now, people aren't consciously thinking, as you've described there, as such, are they? But do you think, or are they? But do you think that one of the apprehensions and nervousness about clowns that some people have might be about what you've described, is that they could do anything. They look different, they're acting different, and I don't know where this is going to go when they come in.
I mean, that has been referenced as a theory to explain it.
We've talked a little bit about bursts of status and the power dynamic.
Yeah. So when there's status, which is about so those who know, those who do things right, generally we say they have status and they have power, right? Because they control, they're not going to mess up, they do well, they pass their exams, they get to university, they have a good job, everything works out for whatever reason. Not because of things they do necessarily, but because maybe who they are. We don't need to get into that. But they are the right people, and then there's the wrong people. And those are the two kinds of, if you put those two together in clowning, you get this dynamic where you could play with what we think this is. And it's not as fixed, as universal as we think. It's a relief, and it opens up new possibilities. And that's one of the functions of clowns, Otherwise, we'd be going around just thinking, I always do things wrong, that's just how it is, full stop. Or I am always right. Yeah, no argument. But the clowns play with this doubt, with this in-between stuff, and it's not quite as we would like it to be or think it should be. And that opens up lots of possibilities, because then suddenly you could play the opposite. Then suddenly you could say, okay, so I'm going to give, be the one who's wrong, and I'm going to be the one everyone likes. Or I'm going to be so sure that I'm right that people will suspect something about me. Or there's a funny thing about clowns, it becomes something that's not so funny, in that when it can be that if you reveal or you perform your clumsiness or your propensity to forget things, or telling me, or did I say that? No, I didn't mean it. So if you perform this kind of clownishness, people will trust you. There's something kind of heartwarming about someone who admits their mistakes and doesn't seem to be dictating. I think that's great. On the other hand, you put those skills in the hand of someone who wants to manipulate people, then it's not so great. So if you have someone who uses that consciously or semi-consciously in order to get people to vote for them, for example, then you have a kind of populism in politics, which we're familiar with now. That's strictly a clown technique to convince people via your admission of I don't know, I don't care, or I don't care about the rules, or did I say that? Anyway, it's a little.
So making conscious choices to use clowning techniques to better your cause, if you like, I suppose. Yeah, I think as well. I took the idea of that power and balance idea is really useful for education and teaching, I think, as well, because schools are coming up with concepts now, sort of democratically coming up with curriculums with the pupils. Or you are right to say that it's absolutely right that teachers should acknowledge what they don't know as much as what they do, so that. And that's a very inverse approach to teaching traditionally, isn't it? If you go back and it's, I have the knowledge, I'm going to give it to you, I'm going to impart it on you, and you're going to do something with it. But that collaborative learning, schools are taking this on board more. Certainly experimental schools are taking this on board more with great success. So clowning's definitely got something to give to teaching.
Yeah, I think so. In a way, this may be a little obscure point, but it's a bit like, and as we get more into AI and all that kind of stuff, the way it kind of diffuses the potential for writing, and it makes it kind of obsolete. It's almost going back to sort of a medievalist way, where you say, well, I've got the book, the manuscript, pre-printing kind of stuff. I've got the book, the knowledge is in the book, and I can read, so I can read it to you. I am not the knowledge, but I'm going to interpret it for you. So, whether that's a priest or a lecturer, someone who reads from the book. So in a way, and that kind of knowledge the knowledge is somewhere else. And so when I say, hey, get your phones out and Google it, I don't know. And of course, it's problematic. The knowledge is there on Wikipedia. Well, no, not quite. But so it's decentering a little bit where that who owns that knowledge. And of course it's changed. Technological changes mean that power has shifted.
But we know that your comment on
teachers don't have it.
Your little comment there on Wikipedia, but even back in the day, how do we know that the books that we were reading were accurate when we were sourcing knowledge from books? Or I'd been teaching A-level psychology for 15 years before I realised. It was probably after I'd left teaching it for 15 years that I realised that all of the studies I'd been teaching, I found out from another book, were falsified, fabricated, made up. Participants were paid off. It was all complete nonsense. So people are very sort of harsh on Wikipedia, aren't they? But actually, we should be harsh on all knowledge unless we know it's absolutely accurate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not authoritative just because it's got a cover on it, you know.
But also in this day and age, we sort of hark to books, don't we, as a sort of a real place of knowledge because they're papery and they're real and they're not tech.
So the first book I wrote was called Clown Readings in Theatre Practice, and it was a book that was, the idea of it was that it was collecting what people had written and said about clowns. So it was like a kind of bibliography, collection of, so it was readings. You can read, people said this and that person thought that, and this was the idea. So it was partly trans-historical, a little bit transcultural, but not only within certain fields that I'm familiar with. And doing that book was really fascinating for me because the ideas that we've had about what clowns are, what they're for, why we have them, and also how it works, but mostly about what they are and what their function is and what their meaning is. It's just so fascinating because it just changes across history so much. And as I mentioned, talking about how I'm interested in clowning as a practice, as action, they just don't match up to what actual clowning is happening. Actually, I'll give you an example because I was reading recently a book about, within clown circles, he's kind of famous now because he was forgotten. A clown that came from Cuba in 1870 came to Europe as a servant because slaves were no longer allowed on European soil, but effectively was a slave to Spain. And then he became a star. Raphael was his first name, and his second name was he didn't have a second name, being born into slavery. And he was known as Chocolat. He was a black man. And that was his stage name. That's how people knew him. And he became a megastar in Paris at the end during like 1890s, 1900s. Megastar, and then with a clown partner as well. And he was painted and drawn by Toulouse-Lautrec, famous artist at the time. And he was represented by other artists. And the drawings of Chocolat, and you probably recognize them when you look at them. This is this man here, Raphael. And the drawings of him were basically caricatures that looked like the caricatures of black people that were being done, in the US at the time, that were based on blackface tradition. It was this kind of horrible racist sort of stereotypes depicting black people as ridiculous physically in the way they moved and everything. But by all accounts, I think that's not how he performed. I mean, he might have done, he could have done, why not? But he didn't. So there's an example of an idea about, in this case, black clowns, black comedy performers. It's so entrenched at the time that a visual artist who is looking at his subject and drawing him draws him wrong because he draws the idea. So anyway, that's a very geeky show my obsession with clown, a bit of clown history. But then if you look at now, so there's lots of ideas about clowns being authentic and being about the in the moment and the spontaneous and so on. And there is something of that, and we've touched on that. But there's nothing inherently true about clowns, particularly. If we look at clown performers and how they do things, I've said, there's lots of structure, there's lots of planning, there's lots of manipulation of an audience. And as teachers, I think that's very similar. If you go into a classroom, you bring the things that you would like to share with the class and that we would like them to understand or to learn or to present them with. And you have a bit of a strategy, or maybe you don't, maybe you're very chaotic, but you have a bit of a strategy and you've done it several times, many times, decades maybe. So you're well practiced at it. But in the moment, you have to deal with these actual people in front of you. So it's the modern contemporary idea of clowning as being some kind of access to, some kind of unmediated truth. I think it's very misguided because it's a lot more thoughtful than that. That's not the word. It's a lot more knowing. Yeah, so you're using this responsiveness to people in the moment. At the same time, with another part of you going, okay, so when they finally realized what I just said was this, then I'm going to do that. And you're thinking ahead, and at least that's how I do it. So anyway, so that's my research stuff into clowning started because of that. Come on, these ideas are too abstract. Let's get into what we actually do, or what clowns actually do, and how it actually works, if that's a thing, even. Anyway, so there's this modern idea about clowning. On the other hand, there's also a contemporary idea about clowning, is it's all about fear and horror and evil and all that kind of thing. That's another new idea about clowning. That's very historically, limited to the last, since, I don't know, 1980 or something like that.
That was going to be my question. Whose fault was that?
Yeah.
Whose fault was it? Do we lay that at Stephen King's feet?
Well, no, I think he was just, he just jumped on a bandwagon, or he did a very particularly good job of writing what was the zeitgeist, what was how people were thinking about these things. I think it's a long process that clowns become infantilized, so they become this figure that was only for children, little children. And that started way back, beginning of the, in 1900 or so. And actually, Clown Chocolat Raphael, the Cuban guy I mentioned, was probably one of the biggest instigators of that, because he was very, very popular with children. And it was a time when people went to the circus more as a family, and it became a new thing to go, previous to that, a circus was a thing for adults, and probably upper class adults, with lots of horse stuff and all that kind of thing. It became a more popular entertainment, and then a thing that children could enjoy as well. And clowns played to that, because that's child says, come on, let's go to the circus again, so it's a marketing thing. Anyway, so all throughout the 20th century, clowns got steadier and steadier, more aiming at children, until the point where they became so infantilized. Then what about those older, between children and adults? What do they do with this clown idea? The adolescents, the teenagers. And it flips as a figure that is supposed to be so definitely a figure of fun, a figure of innocence, a figure that appeals to 3-year-olds, 7-year-olds. There's no malice. It's all in fun. It's all perfectly innocent. But when you're 14, 15, you get a bit suspicious of these things. How can something be so good? Surely there's something bad there. So I think it's, clowns became so kind of inoculated, so sort of diluted in that process, that all that dangerous stuff that I mentioned before, this guy might do something weird suddenly because he's out of control. So that when that becomes dangerous, that becomes really appealing to people, particularly, as I say, it's an adult, it's a young, mostly male, probably, thing, the clown phobia thing that lives in that space, in that adolescent manosphere, as people call it now. It's that, I'm kind of interested in these characters who could just do really bad things, like the Joker kind of, and it becomes that bad clown, and that's part of it.
And I guess
they've got separated.
There's a little bit of that, if you psychologize it a little bit, that teenage brain that's seeking more risky behaviors and excitement, and so maybe they're doing that not just in the real world, but they're kind of seeking that in movies and things as well, aren't they? And so all the things, horror movies become a thing, don't they? And if clowns can be slotted into that, then great. Then it's them, isn't it? Changing their manifestation of things from the clown at the birthday party making balloon animals to, I need this to be something different now, and naturally I'm going to be out there trying to seek risky things, so I'm going to make that thing risky. And obviously the movie makers have latched onto that a little bit, and other people have latched onto it, and it's created this. Do you know what? That's an interesting theory.
And you had that, I think it was 2016, there was this big clown scare stuff in the States and here as well, in the UK, about sightings of evil clowns. And there were some hilarious videos. I remember one I have saved somewhere. Teenagers out in their car in the States somewhere there, and it's kind of filmed like it's a horror movie. And they're going, "Oh man, hey, there's there's a clown there, man. There's a clown. Stop the car. Stop the car. And they stop the car and they get out and they film it. And oh, no, let's run away. And it's just so, it's a great little prank video that they're making for themselves to sort of scare themselves and enjoy that kind of badness,
And I guess that's evolution of anything, isn't it? If you look at clowning 400 years ago in different cultures across the world, they would have no idea that would have been the manifestation of clowns in 2025. And I guess in the same way that when the telephone was invented, nobody would have thought it would have been this thing that was held in your palm and did a million things, Yeah. So
Joseph Grimaldi, the famous English clown Joseph Grimaldi, 1830-ish, around that time. Yeah, it was known. His humour was about, playing tricks on little old ladies, and it was a mean humour. So, I mean, we always have mean humour and innocent humour, and they kind of go in and out of fashion or take different forms. But it's a whole range of humour, and we might call it clown, we might call it something satire or stand up or where it doesn't really matter. But we use these things to play around with ideas of what's not allowed.
I mean, I think that's been a great extension on the discussion of clowning. I think I'm really getting into this. I feel like I'm going to have to buy some books instead of I can find myself sort of genning up a little bit on this, because it just seems to resonate so much with education and teaching. Maybe that wasn't the intention, but it's really kind of worked. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martin.